Hey, it's me again, estate planning attorney Paul Rabalais, and in this video, we're going to talk about 4 ways you can leave your estate. All right, so first let me tell you who this is for and maybe who it's not for. So this video is going to be great for people who are single and they want to designate how they want to leave stuff to their heirs. Great for you. This video is also for married couples who are trying to decide how to leave their estate after both spouses pass away. There are other videos where I've discussed how to leave things to your spouse if you're married, but this is not that. This is how it goes after both spouses pass away if you're married. So there's 4 ways to do it, and most of the ways, let's say the first 3 of the 4 ways to leave your estate assumes you have descendants. You have children, maybe you even have grandchildren, maybe you even have great-grandchildren, but you have descendants, at least you have children. The problem with estate planning, one of the problems with estate planning, one of the challenges of estate planning is you may sign your estate planning documentation, all those legal documents, you may sign them when you're 50 years old, but then you may not pass away until you're 90 years old. And your family circumstances may change from the time that you're 50 when you signed it until the time that you're 90 when you kick the bucket. So many of the estate planning's documentation, it tries to cover certain kind of scenarios, contingencies, some what ifs, just in case family circumstances change from the time you're 50 to the time you're 90, as I'll explain here in a minute. Now, if you set things up when you're 50 and later in your life your family circumstances change, as long as you have the capacity to understand what you're doing, you can always change how your estate gets distributed when you pass away. All right, so with that being said, I'm going to go through the 4 ways to leave your estate. One more point worth mentioning. A minority of people in their estate planning documentation, they provide for specific bequests. They say things like, I leave $10,000 to my nephew. I leave $5,000 to the university. A minority of people do that. And then when they make those specific bequests, and it might be of monetary amounts or it might be items or assets that they have, when they make those specific bequests, now what we're talking about is how they leave what's called the residuary estate, everything else that they own when they die, other than what was left, specifically to specific people. But most people, when they set up their estate, most people don't have those specific bequests. They just say, I leave my estate this way. So we're talking now about the people who don't have specific bequests and they leave their estate this way, or they do have specific bequests and they leave the residuary of their estate this way. Just going through some lingo there. All right, so this kind of way number 1 is probably the most common. Is it the right way to do it? Maybe, maybe not. This is all subject to what you feel is best for your family. But the way to leave your estate, number 1, I'd say most common, is where you and this is assuming you have descendants. Your estate planning documents may say, I leave my estate to my children. Or it might say, I leave my estate to my children equally. And if any of my children die before me, then when I die, I leave that child's share to that child's children. And some people word that as, I leave that to my descendants per stirpes, means the same thing. You leave it to your children. If any children die before you and those children had children, then the deceased child's share would go to the deceased child's children. All right, so that's fine and dandy. That's pretty simple for the ordinary layperson to understand. There's one little potential problem with that I'm going to get to, and the second way that you can leave your estate. So let's jump right in, and I'll tell you the second way, and then we'll go back and look at the difference between the two. So the second way to do it is same as above. I leave it to my descendants per stirpes, or I leave it to my children, and if any children predecease me, I leave their share to their children. But you add a layer of protection here. You say, if anybody who inherits me is under the age of, you pick the number, let's say 25, then they will not inherit outright. Their share will be held in a trust for them. So the 50-year-old might set that up, and maybe at the time he has grandchildren, maybe he doesn't. But by the time he's 90 and he dies, maybe one of his children passed away and left some minor children. We really don't want that grandpa's assets to go to minors. When minors inherit in their own name, it's kind of a nightmare because minors can't inherit. They don't have the ability to contract. They don't have the ability to accept the inheritance. So now judges and courts have to be involved and oversee that minor's inheritance until they reach the age of majority when it's dumped in their lap. So an extra layer of protection is to say, I leave it to my descendants per stirpes, but if any of them are under the age of, and again, you put in the number 21, 25, whatever, then their share will be held in trust. Maybe you designate a family member to handle it for them, and maybe you designate that distributions would be authorized for that young person, even before they're 25 for their health, education, maintenance, or support. But when they're 25, they get it. That keeps the courts out of overseeing a minor heir's inheritance. So that's number 2. Leave it to my descendants per stirpes, but if anybody's under 25 and they inherit from me, their share will be held in trust. Way number 3, we're getting a little bit complicated here. So same scenario, I leave to my descendants per stirpes, which means I leave my estate to my kids, and if any of my kids die before me, I leave their share to their kids. But you might say anybody who inherits from me, their share will be held in a trust, regardless of their age and regardless of whether they're a child or a grandchild. That starts to get a little bit complicated. Now all of the heirs, they're like, okay, you die, and they're like, what do you mean I'm inheriting in a trust? What's a trust, and why did my dad do that? So it does get a little complicated, but some parents or grandparents want to provide the extra protections in place for their survivors in case that parent or grandparent wants those extra precautions in place for perhaps they're worried that their child or grandchild who's going to inherit may get divorced, and they want the child or grandchild to inherit in a trust, perhaps to allow the child or grandchild to keep those inherited assets. Maybe a parent or grandparent wants to set things up so that if a child who may inherit in the future has lawsuits or judgments against them, then the child's inheritance can be arranged in a trust, spendthrift trust, for example, so that a creditor of the child cannot seize the child's inheritance. So that's where we're getting into some additional protections. The trustee designation of those trusts becomes very important. The distribution options on those trusts becomes very important to make sure that those protections that you're aiming for really do occur. So that's the 3rd way to leave your estate. The 4th way to leave your estate, and this could apply whether you have descendants or whether you don't. It's just I'm leaving my estate to these people in these shares, and I'm going to decide whether each one gets their inheritance outright or whether it's going to go into a trust for them. And if it goes into a trust for them, you state the terms of the trust, such as who's the trustee, the methods for determining distributions from the trust to the beneficiary. So that number 4 can apply to anybody, whether you have kids, whether you have grandkids, or whether you just want to leave your estate to named beneficiaries, which could be individuals or it could be charities. And you would want them all to share as long as everybody's share adds up to 100% of your estate. So there you have it, the 4 ways. Let me give you a quick summary. The most common, I leave my estate to my children equally, and if any children predecease me with children, then the child's share goes to the child's children. That's a real common, real easy to understand. But if young people do inherit from you outright, it's going to be a mess. So the second one is a nice one. I leave it to my children, but if any children die before me and have children, then the child's share goes to the child's children. But if anybody inherits from me and they're not yet 25, their share is going to be held in trust until they're 25. Keeps the courts from overseeing a minor heir's inheritance. Number 3, I leave it to my descendants per stirpes, which is the same thing. Everybody who inherits from me, their share will be held in a trust. You might do that to add a more layers of divorce protection and creditor protection for the heirs. And then number 4 is I'm just going to leave it to these people or these charities. And for the people that I leave it to, I'm gonna leave it in a manner that it adds up to 100%. But to the people that I leave stuff to, I'll just make a determination on an individual basis whether they can have their share outright, or they can have, or they'll need to have their share in a trust for some reason, either youth or not able to handle money or one of these other reasons. So bottom line here is you've spent your entire lifetime working toward, the first thing people work toward is making sure they have enough money and that they don't run out of money. And most people do a pretty good job with that. And there's a whole entire financial services industry geared toward making sure you don't run out of money. So when you take care of that, you need to take care of how best to leave the money that you don't run out of, so that you can enhance the lives of those family members and those people and those organizations that mean the most to you. Okay, make sure you give it a big thumbs up. Make sure if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. That way you won't miss anything. Hope you enjoy watching these videos as much as I enjoy making them. Make sure you share it with your friends and relatives. We'll see you next time.